This is by far the scariest and most bizarre situation I've ever been in, and after lurking for so long, I have to share it. My boyfriend Dan and I had just started renting an apartment together and money was tight. It was 2001. We were both in our early 20s and I couldn't find a job, and I relied on word of mouth to earn some cash wherever I could. I love to clean and organize, so I gave friends and family the go-ahead to give out my name and number to anybody who could use my help over the summer. Dan, his brother, and Dad all did carpentry work and also got work through word of mouth. None of them had too many exciting stories to tell, other than doing work in a hoarder's home or odd requests as far as the cabinet design or placement was concerned. Dan got a call from an elderly woman wondering if he can come by and grab her an estimate on finishing her kitchen. She said her husband died before he could install the cabinets and countertop that he purchased, and somebody from her church gave her his number. He said absolutely and offered to come out the next day. She objected and said, "This needs to be done now though, that's why I called." They said that you could help me. What am I supposed to do? I'm an old woman. I live all alone and my husband died. Dan was a pretty chill guy and kept calm, explaining that I had his car and I wouldn't be home from running errands for a couple of hours, and by then it would be too dark for him to come out. Let me also note that although Dan had a soft, not very masculine voice, he was a big guy at about 6'4" and pretty muscular as well. The old lady perked up and asked, "Will she be coming along tomorrow?" In the sweetest voice. Dan said, looking back, that this should have been a red flag by the tone in her voice and the fact that she was so adamant about him coming right that moment, but as soon as she heard he had a girlfriend, she changed her tone and got excitement in her voice, asking about the next day like it was no problem for her to wait. He didn't see anything weird about it at the time and felt bad for her because he thought she must have been lonely and wanting company or something. The next day, we both head out to her house. We brought along a small bouquet of flowers that we got at the grocery store to give her. I figured she would enjoy chatting while Dan checked out her kitchen, and maybe I could come back with Dan and help her with other things around the house while he worked if she needed. Her township was only 45 minutes away, but I was excited to go because this township is known to have really awesome old houses and mansions. There are also other normal subdivisions depending on what direction you drive in. My friends and I back in high school used to drive there just to cruise around and look at neat houses. When we pulled up to the old lady's house, I was eager to go inside because it was such a cute looking house from the outside. Very fairy tale-ish, gray with white trim, with vines climbing up the side of the house. It was a shotgun style house, so it looked tiny from the front. The small lawn was overgrown and messy, but I honestly thought it added to the charm of the home. We knock on the door and we are greeted with a tiny elderly woman, shorter than me, and I'm 5 foot. She had on a dirty nightgown and even dirtier slippers. She looked past Dan and smiled wildly at me, while reaching her bony hands out to grab my face. I hold up the flowers to deflect and say, "Dan wanted to bring you some flowers." She lost her smile, grabbed the flowers and said, "The kitchen's through here." She turned around to lead us, revealing a brown stain on the back of her nightgown. Dan and I look at each other and he makes a goofy, grossed out face. I make a judgmental face back and swat his arm as if to say, "Be nice, she's an old woman." We walk through a dark living room, and nothing is really out of the ordinary other than the smell, which is like cigarettes, mold, and body odor. We enter the kitchen and there's a closed door about 10 to 12 feet ahead, leading to rooms further back in the house. There's a man sitting shirtless at the kitchen table in the corner. He was very hairy and overweight with greasy hair down to his shoulders. The old lady said, "This is my son Marcus." He was probably in his late 30s. He said nothing but stood up and took his bowl to the sink. Great. Marcus has no pants on. Just dirty, and I mean crazy dirty. Tidy whities with several holes around the waistband. I shot Dan the same grossed out look that he shot me earlier. He jokingly shoots me back a judgmental look and swats my arm. I give him a, "No, seriously, I'm creeped out" kind of look, and he nods to acknowledge it. "So what cabinets are you?" Dan tried to ask, but was interrupted with Marcus pointing to the flowers and asking the lady, "Where are those from?" She points to Dan and Marcus snatches the flowers out of her hand, throws them into the open trash bag sitting on the floor, and walks out of the kitchen into the living room we just walked through. He just lost his dad, so I assumed he had some sort of mental disability and was being sensitive about another dude showing his mom attention. So where are the cabinets and countertop that you need installed?" Dan asked the old woman. "I thought you were bringing them," she huffed out, sounding shocked that he would even ask that. I'm sorry, I thought you said your husband bought them and you needed them installed. Dan said, confused and a bit nervous at how the woman was reacting now. So you brought nothing? What is it you do? What is it that you're going to try to sell me? She gets closer to Dan as she's throwing her hands up in disbelief and anger. Marcus comes quickly, stomping in at the sound of his mother's distress. Rushing in from the other door past the kitchen was another man, around the same age. Wonderful. This guy is in his underwear too. Freaking dirty tighty-whities. This woman told Dan on the phone that she lived all alone. This new guy freezes just past the doorway and just stares at me, standing only feet away. Marcus rushes forward and stands between us and his mother and pushes her out towards the living room. Both doors are blocked by the tighty-whitey twins. Dan scoops me up behind him in an attempt to block me from both guys. We have to be heading out now, he said calmly, hoping not to escalate things. We hear the old lady squawk out aloud, "Ha!" from the living room. Marcus doesn't move. I'll see what I can do about the cabinets, Dan said as we inch forward. Marcus barely inches forward but still blocks the way. I frantically tug on Dan's arm to get him to look over at the other guy, now with his hand down his dirty underrag masturbating. That's when my calm, chill boyfriend loses it. I've never heard him scream like this. He remembers growing up, his older brother taught him how to deal with bullies. Say some crazy messed up shit to them, and they'll be too stunned to react. Dan screams with rage. The last person that cornered me got beat to death. You won't like what I'll do to you and your mom if you don't get out of my way. With his veins popping, spit flying. Marcus looked surprised and he rushed past us towards his brother. For a split second, we both thought he was going to attack Dan, so he instinctively threw up his fist to defend himself. Marcus pushes his brother into the other room and slams the door behind them. Dan and I hurry out of the house. I think the old lady was sitting in the dark in the living room, but I didn't stop to look around as we were scurrying out. We called the cops when we got home. Didn't have cell phones then, but nothing really came of it because they said he didn't really do anything wrong. He didn't expose himself either, and they didn't try to attack us. They agreed that it was bizarre, but nothing could be done about it. We asked around and nobody knew these people, so we're not sure how she got our number. I don't know if they were just mentally ill, if she lied on purpose to get us over there, or why things happened the way they did. It was just scary as shit. Feeling boxed in and not knowing what these creepy, almost naked dudes were thinking. Ever since then, I tend to avoid going inside other people's houses unless I really know them. I was 17 at the time. My friends and I had rented a beach house in New Jersey. We were so excited, and it was really the best time of my life. My friend's boyfriend was there, and he was the only one who was 21. This will be important later. Anyways, at about 2 a.m., we heard a knock on the door. We were drinking and smoking, having a great time, playing beer pong, and engaging in general debauchery. So I answered the door, and it's the lady from downstairs. We didn't know her, and she was on vacation with her 2 sons. They were really little kids. The lady looked to be in her 30s. So we're like, can we help you? She asks to bum a cigarette. We gave her one and let her in. She was already wasted when she came in, stumbling around, slurring, and just being creepy in general. We made her a drink and went back to the games and such. Eventually, we had to kick her out because she began yelling and becoming irate with certain people. We just had enough of her shenanigans. She is really mad now, and she goes stomping down the stairs and slams the door, telling us to screw ourselves. Whatever. We continue on with our also night. At about 4:30 a.m., we went downstairs to go outside. We wanted to watch the sunrise on the beach. Now, the way it was set up is you had to pass her apartment in order to get downstairs. On our way down, I happened to look at her apartment, and I noticed the door was wide open. I immediately got a terrible feeling. I peeked inside, and the apartment was in shambles. Overturned furniture and trash everywhere. That's when I hear it. I hear her kid screaming at the top of his lungs. I listen for a little bit, and he is not stopping, and she isn't trying to console him. And it doesn't sound like a normal cry. It sounds anguished. I saw them playing earlier, and the youngest boy was about 3 or 4, and the oldest maybe 6 or 7. I heard the younger one crying. Screw it. I have to go in there and make sure the kid is okay. Me being drunk, stoned, and underage walks into the lady's rental. Now I know this is dumb, but I couldn't let that baby go on crying, and I wanted to make sure he was okay. I walk through the living room and into the kitchen. The first thing I find is a gallon of vodka. It's empty. She is the only adult in this house. Immediately, I realized that she drank all of that. There was a puddle on the floor and my feet are now soaked. I follow the sounds of the crying baby into a hallway and finally walk into a pitch black room. I see the older child sleeping on the bed, his head hanging off the edge. I immediately drop to the ground because I can hear the crying, but it's lower physically than I am. So I am crawling on the ground in the pitch black. I feel a bump on the ground. It's the woman. She's passed out on the ground. The baby is halfway underneath her. She freaking passed out holding the baby. I grabbed him and headed back outside. My friends were all screaming and I was crying. My friend's boyfriend, who is 21, called the police since he's the only one who was allowed to legally drinking and we were all drunk. He held the baby and waited outside until the cops got there while we hid in the room. The lady ended up being taken away in restraint. She was screaming at the top of her lungs, flailing. I'll never forget that night. Her brother came over the next day and apologized to us. He said she is on medication and mixed it with alcohol. We didn't see her or the kids for the rest of our trip. This story happened around 2017. I was 18 or so and I lived in a dorm in Kiev. It was built at the stupidest place possible for a student's dormitory, in a quiet neighborhood between your regular 9-floor houses with strollers and old ladies sitting on benches. This was kind of uncomfortable and logistics were awful, especially at night with the nearest subway station being a 30-minute walk away. So long story short, I had my final second year exams coming and I was studying non-stop with all-nighters and a fridge full of Red Bull. What can I say? German was pretty hard for me. During one of these nights, I felt this unbearable craving for Dutch stroopwafels. Guess my brain was finally going crazy without sugar and enough sleep. By that time, I was really tired of studying and desperate for a walk and a cigarette. My roommates were sleeping and my best friend was deep in her books also studying. So I went out to get some waffles, alone at 1:30 a.m. Yeah, I know. Actually, it wasn't something unusual. We went out a lot, even in the middle of the night. It's not like we lived in the most dangerous Kiev neighborhood. It was the second or third most dangerous, I guess. So I grabbed my wallet and cigarette case. Mental note, this is an important detail and went out. Another important detail, we had some kind of a curfew in our dorm. After midnight, doors were always locked and you couldn't open them unless somebody from the inside buzzed you in. Usually, it was some grumpy lady from the dorm administration. If you were lucky enough and it took them literally forever to open the door, they were usually just sleeping, even though it was a regular night shift they were paid for. Seriously, I knew a girl who waited for 15 minutes outside in the middle of the night before, in January, and still was yelled at for being late. Anyways, I went out. It was a pleasant May evening, warm and quiet. I put in headphones, lit the first cigarette, and headed to the ATB. It was the nearest, even though not the fanciest, 24/7 market within a 10-minute walking distance. While approaching the market, I noticed a man. He stood at the bus stop, which was strange because it was like an hour since the last bus and the next one would be here almost at 6 a.m. So I figured he was either drunk and had nowhere to go and was about to get ready to call it a night and sleep at a bus stop bench, or it was simply waiting for a taxi at a visible spot. The only way to cross the street without making a huge detour was to take an underground crossing near the bus stop. My craving for Dutch waffles was unbearable and it was kind of a big street with a lot of lights and cars going here and there, even in the middle of the night, so I took it. Yeah, I know, part 2. Before going down the stairs, I looked back at the man and realized 3 things. 1, he didn't look like a homeless person. His clothes weren't fancy, but they definitely were clean and were the right size. His face was clean and he was shaved. And he was generally decent. 2, he wasn't drunk or high as far as I could see. He stood firmly on his feet, definitely not too drunk, and there were no bottles or anything near him. His face was concentrated and his eyes were completely sober. 3, he looked directly at me. I stopped for a second to put out a cigarette and throw it in a trash bin. I looked at him and his eyes were just so intense. He didn't blink. His gaze didn't dart away. He just looked right at me with this completely focused stare like he tried to remember everything he saw. He then nodded. I nodded back and went for my Dutch waffles. I was afraid he would follow me into the underground crossing, but he stayed there. When I looked back, he was still staring at me. After a while, I was coming back with waffles in both hands. I honestly forgot about the man at a bus stop. It's not like he was the only strange person I met during my prior 2 years living in Kiev. And also, I was tired and really concerned about my German exam tomorrow. So yeah, I was coming back the same way, and it didn't occur to me that the man was still there until I saw him again. He stood at the same spot, exactly the same look, exactly the same heavy stare. I kind of started to feel nervous. My instincts were screaming me to get the heck out. This time I wasn't looking directly at him, and I proceeded a little bit quicker. As soon as I passed him, lighting another cigarette, I heard footsteps behind. I tried to convince myself that he just decided to finally call it a night, but come on. Why now? Why just after I passed by, heading to a poorly lighted, empty small street? I began to walk quicker and quicker. His footsteps became quicker too. We were entering an empty, quiet street. It was still like a 5-minute walk to my dorm, and it was almost 2 a.m., my hands full of waffles. My own stupidity was never so obvious. At some point I was almost ready to run. I even began to, but the man called me out. "Excuse me, young lady. Don't be scared. You just dropped your cigarettes. Here they are." I didn't stop, though. I was kind of panicked and tired. Hadn't slept more than 4 hours a day in a week. I didn't stop, but I looked back. And yeah, he did have a pack in his hand. Pack of the exact Winstons that I smoke. I slowed down. And then I realized one thing. I had a cigarette case back then because A, it was cool, and B, I didn't want to smoke too much. You can only put 10 cigarettes in there, so I was sure I wouldn't smoke too much during one day. I didn't carry packs around ever. And the man smiled at me and started to walk towards me really fast. Oh boy, did I run. As soon as I started to run, he started to run too. My heart sank and I was terrified. I really wanted to scream, but decided to save my breath. I'm really not a good runner. He was quick, and the distance between us was getting smaller and smaller with every second. I went full panic mode. I knew that after the next turn, we had a straight road leading to my home, without any lights. Perfect sprint material. I also knew that even if he wouldn't get to me on the road, I still wouldn't be able to open the door right away. And I probably would have been beaten, assaulted, or who knows what else before anybody could bother to open the door. I had no time to call the police or someone inside. Meanwhile, the man was just running behind silently without any words and freaking menacingly, because I turned around one time to look, and I swear he was smiling. Barking dogs don't bite, and this man was sure about to bite. Something about him was completely off. Eerie smile. Complete silence and these focused, unwavering eyes. For a moment there, I was sure I was about to die. But then I took the last turn and saw another man. For a split second, I thought it was an accomplice from the one behind me. But then I realized it was another student, Alex from the 3rd year, the one I saw a couple of times in a dorm. All I could think was, thankfully. I ran faster, screaming hysterically something like, "Stop, Alex, please stop." Thankfully he did and turned around. The man behind me went slower. I didn't turn around before I reached Alex, and when I did, I saw him standing by the turn, breathing hard but still smiling. I started to tug on Alex's sleeve to get him going to the dorm. I was positive that man would now run to catch us both after a quick timeout. But he was just freaking waving to us. I don't know why I remember this so well, but it wasn't like a cool kind of wave. He waved clumsily, like a kid who is learning to give his mom a bye-bye, clapping his palm with his fingers. Then he ran off. That's basically all. We got into the dorm without any further adventures, rushing inside while I tried to explain, not very successfully, what happened. Alex kind of read the mood, and I didn't even have to hurry him. I honestly don't know what would have happened if he weren't there. I thanked him like a million times after that. Never saw that man again despite living 2 more years at the same dorm. I was terrified, but I still ate my waffles, of course. After that, I got pepper spray. Still haven't used it, but now I feel a little bit safer. Now it's just a scary story that I tell my friends or Tinder dates when we run out of topics to talk about and the silence is too awkward. But something is still bugging me. The pack that man had in his hand was Winston's, the same ones I smoked. It never occurred to me until some time later that there could have possibly be 2 explanations. Either this was a pure coincidence, or he checked the cigarette I put out before going down the underground crossing and bought exactly the same pack while I was buying my waffles. And to be honest, the last one scares the heck out of me. I've been a lurker on this subreddit for a while, and I thought that I should post my story. This is the only terrifying and bizarre situation I've ever had in my life. It may seem silly now, but at the time, it was frightening. When I think about it, it makes me realize that I was still somewhat naive. This happened 3 years ago in the middle of July. I'm female and I was 16 years old at the time. I live in Ontario, Canada, and everybody usually has this image that Canada is really safe. However, that perception will not stop any creepers. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens here from time to time, more often now than before. To start off, I live in the suburbs. It is not the safest city, but it can be safe if it's daytime along with being in a well-crowded area. I was going on an evening walk, which I did quite often during the summer, usually before sunset, as I had to be home before that. The path I take my walk on is on the sidewalk of a main road, so there are a lot of cars passing by, and still quite a few cars pass by before sunset, as this is the time some people get home from work as well. I was walking, minding my own business and enjoying the cool evening air. A car honked. I didn't think much of it as I wasn't sure if it was at me, but there also wasn't much traffic either. On the sidewalk, there is an entrance to the plaza, so cars driving onto the main road can turn into this plaza. I looked both ways to make sure a car wasn't going to pull in, and I crossed. Strangely, after I crossed, I noticed the same car from the corner of my eye. This is when I realized the honk was probably at me. After I crossed, I looked back. I don't know why I looked back, but I acted on my hunch to look. I now wonder if I could have avoided this if I just hadn't looked. In that moment, the man made eye contact with me as his window was down. He was turning into the plaza, although his car really wasn't in the plaza. He turned his car into the entrance of it and just stopped it, so he was completely blocking off the sidewalk. If any cars wanted to come in, they couldn't because he blocked it off with his car. And if anybody were walking on the sidewalk even, they'd have to go around his car. I was really confused but alarmed. He opens his car door and starts to approach me, and I begin to back away so he isn't too close. To describe the man, he wasn't that tall but still taller than me. He wore these big black sunglasses, so unfortunately, I don't know what his entire face looks like. He wore a Brazil t-shirt, FIFA World Cup at the time, and white pants. He began to converse with me, telling me that he thought I was some woman that worked at some sort of shop that he goes to, and I told him no. I knew that this was a red flag and probably all BS as well. I had my guard up the entire time. I didn't want to talk to this man, but I did not want to make it appear that I was frightened so he doesn't try and pull some kind of stunt. He was still trying to create conversation with me. Repeatedly kept telling me I was beautiful to the point it would make anybody feel weird, which really did make me uncomfortable. But I just played it off by saying thank you. Then asked me, "How old are you?" To which I then said, "I'm a minor," thinking that maybe he'll just leave me alone, but clearly I thought wrong. He then asked me where I was from, to which I thought saying my ethnicity isn't something private to me, so I told him. I responded saying, "I'm from Syria." I don't know why I asked the same thing back to him because I realized that I'm just feeding the conversation, but at the same time, I didn't want to show my fear, so I was trying to appear calm. He then told me that the old president of his country was Syrian, which is also probably a lie, and was just trying to find some way to relate to me. He then told me Arabic women are very beautiful. At some point in the conversation, he kept calling me beautiful and pretty, which was still making me uncomfortable. He asked me if I were looking for any guys and if I was interested, and I told him no. He then said, "So what boy is causing you trouble then?" I replied, saying that stuff is all a waste of time, thinking if I said that maybe this time he will leave me alone because at this point he seems like he's trying to hook up with me or had some other intention, judging by the way he's acting and talking, which is not something somebody usually initiates on the sidewalk of a main road. I don't know why I've tolerated this uncomfortable conversation at this point, because he then tells me, "You are just so unbelievably beautiful. I don't see why boys wouldn't like you." On the inside, I'm thinking, what the hell does somebody say in response to that? I just awkwardly forced out a laugh. He then proceeded to say, "So seriously, how old are you?" I know I shouldn't have said what I just said now, but I told him how old I was. I said 16. He just stood there saying, "Wow, I never would have thought that. You seem way more mature. I thought you were at least 24. I took the opportunity to ask how old he was since he was so persistent in knowing my age. He said 32. Twice my age. I asked for his name because in the back of my mind, I felt like if I had this info about him, it could be useful. Again, this was probably not a good idea because I realized afterwards this is only feeding the conversation. But he told me his name, and he said it was Jonathan. He asked me for mine, and I said that's a secret. At the time, I was thinking that was slick of me, but I'm actually pretty thankful he didn't get aggressive. He kept insisting that He would move his car from the middle of the entrance so that we could talk, and I said no. I had to get going, so I said that I'm leaving, to which he says, "Why?" What do you mean, why? He then started asking me for my number, and I said I don't give my number to strangers. Then he said he really wanted to be in contact and started asking if I had Facebook or WhatsApp, to which I said no. He kept insisting that we keep in contact after I repeatedly refused to give him any sort of contact information. He then says, "Hey look, I'm going to move my car." I thought this was my chance to leave because he wanted to move his car so he could continue talking to me, so at that moment I said, "I'm leaving, bye." At this point I just had enough. I thought this was the end of it because I heard him say bye after I turned around to leave. Only when I looked to my right, I noticed he was following me in his car. He rolled down his window and began to smile and wave at me, which was really disturbing. This really freaked me out, so I started to walk faster. When I looked back, I didn't see his car, but I was able to connect the dots to realize he went to the gas station that was behind me. Unfortunately, this still wasn't over. His car was parked in the gas station, and he proceeded to walk on foot in the same sidewalk that I'm walking in. So I definitely don't believe he was following me. My fight-flight mode broke in, and I began to run home, which was only minutes away. I even took off my sandals so they wouldn't snap and end up hurting me while running. As I have this 32-year-old Jonathan on my trail, I even stopped for a moment to explain to these two ladies that there is a man following me, to which they looked at me like I was crazy and ignored me. Fortunately, I made it back home safely, and when I looked back, I couldn't see Jonathan, so I assumed he just turned back when he saw me running. I consider myself lucky that he didn't start running after me. I truly believe that if all of this hadn't occurred on the sidewalk of a main road, but rather in a secluded area, he probably might have tried something. His presence made me feel uncomfortable. Needless to say, these evening walks also came to an end. I don't know what is going on this past week. Maybe the nice weather is bringing the weirdos out of the woodwork. I had some dude with a heavy accent lie about being at school for registration and try to get me into his SUV a few days ago. And this morning I had an incident in my doctor's office. I have learned my lesson. Just because a person comes in with a young child doesn't mean they are nice and friendly and safe to talk to. Sorry if this is messy. I'm still a little bit shaken up, and it takes me a long time to calm down when I get that way. I had an early appointment with my primary, and my son can't be dropped off until 8:30 at preschool, so I brought him with me, which I try to never do because he's a maniac sometimes. So we are in the sitting room waiting, and he's playing at the block table when a heavy-set man who seems a little bit older, maybe late 40s, walks in with the little boy who looks to be the same age as my son. The little boy had the most beautiful hair, and he was also crying though. So I sort of made eye contact with the man and smiled sympathetically to say, "Yeah, I've been there." This boy was really freaking out. So anyways, my son tries to go play with the little boy and tells him to stop crying, and the boy goes over to the block table with him. The older man sits down right next to me in a completely empty waiting room. He turns and stares at me like intently, which I can see from the corner of my eye. I ignore him for a minute and watch the kids. He goes, "So is that your son?" I say yes, and he tells me that the little guy is his grandson. I tell him he's very cute and has beautiful hair. This is where it gets weird. So are you still with his father? Yep, about 5 years married now. Him. That's too bad because you're a beautiful young lady. Me. Thanks. Yeah, it's important to have a father in a young man's life, he said. I was always there for my children. I said, yeah, definitely. I'm looking at my phone at this point. So why don't you give me your number so we can get together sometime? Or as a matter of fact, I'll give you mine, he said. I tell him I'm really not interested in that, and he's literally pushing his arm against me and completely overtaking my personal space at this point. He grabs a pen from the table in the middle of the chairs and writes down some numbers. He puts it on my lap and winks at me. I turn back to the kids awkwardly because I don't know what else to do. Next thing I know, he grabs the top of my leg, like only a few inches down from my you-know-what, and squeezes. Without removing his hand, he goes, "Now you're going to call me, right? Promise?" And up until he did that, I really believed he was just not great at reading social cues. I was wrong. He knew exactly what he was doing, and I could see in his eyes that he knew exactly how he was making me feel and just didn't care. The receptionist said my name, and I got up and grabbed my son and walked up to the window, shaking, almost crying. She asked me if that guy was making me feel weird, and I said yes, extremely. and she told me to turn from the window and walk through the door back to where the rooms are. When I got back there, she apologized and she thought I knew him because of me talking to him and him sitting next to me. When she saw him grab me, she realized I was scared and yelled my name. When I did come out after my appointment, he was gone. She said after his own appointment, he went back into the waiting area and sat there until she asked him if he needed her to call a cab. Was he waiting for me? Like, what the heck, man? All I did was sympathetically smile at him for a second because of his kid acting up.